Okay, we're going to get started. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Tammy Rising, and I am the founder of Pathfinder Solutions. And I wanted to welcome you to our webinar today called How to Cultivate a Happy and a High-Performing Team. This is an interactive session. You can ask questions anytime by putting them in the chat. We will have 4 polling questions throughout this webinar, and they will just appear and they will remain up for a little bit. When they do come up, participate, and then we will be sharing those results. We do respect your time, and so we will be ending today at 3 o'clock Central Standard Time. The strategies that you'll be taking away today have the potential to dramatically change the game in your company immediately. And you can take these strategies away to increase employee engagement, to help your team confront conflict professionally and to be able to move on quickly, to retain top performers, and to create a culture of trust, collaboration, teamwork, and efficiency. And before we go on any further, I want to introduce to you the facilitator, David Boehm.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is David Boehm, and I am a retired specialist that was a turnaround specialist, spending most of my career working with venture capitalists and equity investors. And I would be brought in to run companies that were not performing in which an investment was made. These companies have one thing in common, and that was poor execution. These companies did not have a culture that nurtured a flexible and responsive, flat organization built for speed. I'm here to interview Tammy Rising. She is the CEO of Pathfinder Solutions, whose mission is to build cultures by design. So we're going to jump right into this. And again, if you have questions, put them in the chat box. So Tammy, what are the most common issues or problems you see when you begin a project?
David, it's a great question to kick off with. When I am first starting to work on a project, the problems that I see are that the team, especially sometimes the executive team, they're rowing in different directions. And the company or the team members as a whole maybe don't know their expectations of their roles and how they actually fit into the organization. I also see that not all the team knows what direction the company's headed and what the goals are and know when they actually are met. So they aren't able to perform at that high level when they're sort of in obscurity.
Now, Tammy, when you have people, and I've run companies that were small companies that had 30, 40 employees. I've run companies that had thousands of employees. But I don't care how small the company is or how large the company is, there's going to be disagreement. There's going to be conflict. When you talk to companies, do these organizations have a process for conflict resolution? Is that a normal kind of policy that people have?
Not at all. Not the companies that I go into. They don't have a way to confront conflict or to address disagreements or topics where they don't agree on the direction to go. They don't have that framework.
So what happens when they don't? What are some of the characteristics in those organizations?
When they don't have that, the characteristic in the organization is that it is not, like you said earlier, built for speed. What's happening is their key performance indicators are lagging. They're not able to achieve their goals as quickly as they possibly could. And the reason for that is because that conflict is holding them back. So if conflict isn't addressed, so unaddressed conflict doesn't necessarily hold us back on its own, but if it's unaddressed, then that holds us back because it can hold us back because we're not identifying what is actually getting in the way of meeting those key performance indicators. Does that make sense, David?
No, it does. And, very often I would be replacing an existing management team. And one of the things I found that they had in common was that they would spend an inordinate amount of time, sometimes 50, 60, 75% of their time, being the referee among their people instead of being focused on driving the company's goals and objectives. So, no, that makes a heck of a lot of sense. So, how does a company develop a process of conflict resolution?
That is the key question, and something I work with teams on all the time. And the way that you address or have a process for that is to identify initially what are the agreements or the values that we're living with, we're agreeing to express in this company. What behaviors are we agreeing to demonstrate? How are we working together? That is the foundation. If we don't have that, then we can't even start to create any kind of a conflict resolution process. But the conflict resolution process can be initiated with those and creating this environment where it's safe to speak up and it's safe to address the conflict. Now, it's outside of the scope of this webinar, but what I often work with teams on once those two pieces are established is a framework from which to have those conversations. Because one of the reasons why people aren't having those conversations is they don't even know the best, most effective and productive way to have those conversations. So a step-by-step framework of what you say and how you move beyond the conflict.
So you're going to help them establish a set of rules and how to do this. You don't want a referee there. You want people to settle their conflicts most of the time by themselves. And they need to conflict. You know, they have a conflict. They need to confront and resolve and move forward so the company can move forward. So, which is a good segue for us, because let's turn our attention to employees' real concerns. So why don't we start with that, especially in an era where we talk about quiet quitting and people just not giving it their all in these companies. So what are the company's real concerns?
Yes, so companies not giving or employees not giving their all is part of the unhappiness, is a result of the unhappiness that happens. And what I find is it's three things that's creating that workplace dissatisfaction, and that's work-life balance. Now, we all have our thoughts about what balance means, and we can talk about that in a minute. And then another one is diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, those initiatives. And for the third one is for the employees to feel like they have purpose.
So tell us a little bit about, why don't we just take them one at a time? So let's start with work-life balance. And let's talk about that. I use the term work-life integration when I'm in companies because I don't know what balance means, but I know what integration means. So if you could talk about that, that'd be great.
Yes, and I agree with you, David. Balance is not possible. If we talk about work-life balance, what goes in people's heads is that it means equal time. And if we are encouraging people to create work-life balance, then we're actually setting them up to fail. So I really like, David, your idea of this work-life integration. According to the Harvard Business Review, employee burnout costs the U.S. between $125 billion and $190 billion every year in healthcare. So work-life integration, or whatever we call it, is not just good for the employee who is burnt out, but it's also good for the company. Employers who address these issues will not only save money in the long term with reduction in turnover and absenteeism, but they'll also foster more morale and productivity in the workplace. So the way that we can help employees create this work-life integration is a few things that employers can support. And one of those is keep strict working hours. Every team that I've ever worked with, and you might experience this in your own workplace, the leadership is emailing after hours on evenings and on weekends. And we want to make sure the message is very clear that if the leaders are doing that, we're not expecting everybody else to do that. to really support the strict working hours, to support the employee who has other endeavors in their life that they want to go after, and rest and self-care. Have a long-term plan to manage stress deadlines. And we want to, so for instance, I see a lot of times in companies, and I get to talk to about 25 people one-on-one every month in my one-on-one coaching. So these are coming from conversations and research as well outside of these coaching conversations. What's happening is that new initiatives are brought on before really assessing the capacity, not only of the organization, but of the individual. So to have a long-term plan and be very strategic about when you bring on the initiatives, that supports work-life integration. To support them to prioritize their personal life. We want to make sure that if we believe that and we're sharing that with people, that we really support them, make sure our actions back up that support. Because what happens is if we say, hey, it's Friday at 3 and on Monday at 8 o'clock, I need you to have this done. What message does that send to the employee about work-life balance?
Now, you were sharing with me a story. I thought that would be really good for the participants. But one of the companies you were there, if you could share that story, that'd be great.
So a client shared a story with me when she first started in this organization, that she left a company after 8 years because she was working 60 to 80 hours a week, and it was not safe for her to speak up in meetings and to speak up for what she needed outside of work. So she left that company after 8 years and came to work for the organization that I was brought in to coach, because it was a startup organization. And what the CEO knows is that with startups, it's easy to lose that work-life balance. And so what she actually was looking back at her notes before this webinar started, and I noticed she had said that she wanted to take advantage of this company that she's now working for, that I'm helping to serve, take advantage of the work-life balance motto that they have there. That's why she came there, because she likes to surf. She has 2 boys. She's newly engaged and doesn't want to let that go. And she was stressed and on medication from the other employer that she was working with for 8 years. But even though we can have that motto of work-life balance, we need to make sure we have policies in place and processes in place to make sure that doesn't go by the wayside when the going gets really busy.
Yeah, that's really insightful, because employee turnover, people just quitting on you, or the new phrase is quiet quitting, where they're doing the least amount of work. That doesn't work for organizations, and organizations that are embracing these changes are flourishing. So it's an interesting concept. I want to change gears just a little bit, because one of the themes that I find in companies that call me up still, which I do. I don't run companies anymore, but I sit on boards and that kind of thing, is around diversity and equity and inclusion and belonging. How is that movement impacting organizations today? And can you share any insights about this? How do you make it so that it's not all consuming, yet you're paying attention?
That's a great point, David. Most employees, they appreciate being valued for who they are and what they contribute, more than a bonus or a raise. So that doesn't mean that bonuses or raises aren't valuable to people, but what this research is saying, and what I find in my daily conversations, is that they value being who they are. That's where the diversity comes in.
Now, I know you talked to me, and I don't know if you're planning to show it, but you had a video on this. Do you have that to show?
Yes, I have a video that is from a CXO of an organization, and I'd like her to share her thoughts about what it's like to be part of a team that has a sense of diversity and belonging and inclusion.
After working with Pathfinder Solutions, our team is Um, it's just much more bonded. We're functioning very well. We trust each other. We assume the best about each other. We have direct conversations with each other if there's something wrong. I just feel like it's a much more positive work experience. And I attribute all of that to Tammy. There's really no other factor that would influence our dynamic that much.
That's a great testimonial about that. Yeah, one of the things that I found in every company, I did 13 turnarounds in 25 years. And when I would come in, one of the things that was really lacking was a sense of purpose that permeated the entire organization, that everyone knew what the company's goals were. And this is really critical. So can you talk to us a little bit about the importance of making sure that you educate your company about purpose?
It is critical to slow down and educate the purpose of the organization, because employees have a direct relationship with how that impacts their purpose in the organization. They need to know where they fit in the organization. What I find is a lot of organizations, especially when I'm getting started on a new project, is they haven't shared that. They skip that step. These soft steps that I sometimes call them are the ones that make the biggest impact in employee happiness. So letting the employee know what their expectation is in fulfilling the purpose, how they fit into the big picture, and then continuing to acknowledge their contributions toward that purpose. So it's multi-stepped, but these moves can be done in 5 minutes or less with an email, with a phone conversation, with a Zoom, or face-to-face. And it's these little things that are huge for the employee happiness, and therefore you'll see it reflected in their performance.
That's interesting. A few years ago, I ran a seminar. It was before the pandemic, in 3 different cities. And we wanted to drive people to this seminar. We wanted to have 100 people attend each one. And we had some great speakers. Well, we actually engaged the entire company, whether they were in accounting or customer service, or they were technical people, whatever it is. And we gave them a list, and we were sitting in we were walking through the company with wads of cash. And when people signed something up, we gave them money. And it was hilarious. So we had like accounting people making these calls. You talk about a sense of purpose. We ended up with almost 500 participants in the 3 cities that were there. So it's a great example of people getting out of their comfort zone with a common purpose, understanding this was going to drive incremental revenue to the company, and understanding, hey, I may be in accounting, but that's how I get paid, right? That money eventually, if we're not making sales, how do I get paid? And it was great. So,
David, it reminds me of something that what I talk about a lot with organizations is about ownership and cultivating a sense of ownership, in which that's what you're talking about with that initiative in your story. It's cultivating that ownership towards achieving that purpose or that mission.
And that's a great segue for where we're going. And that is, what can leaders do to create a competitive, high performance, high caliber teams? Can you identify them for us, Tammy? Let's talk about that.
Great. So I find that there are 3, and we'll talk about these today. Setting clear expectations with our teams, enforcing positive accountability, which is different than negative accountability, or the way we think about accountability, and skill building, but maybe not in the way you might think of it.
And, you often use phrase like, we need to slow down today to get fast results tomorrow. What does that mean for us?
What that means is, we started to talk about it a little bit. It's slowing down, to not skip steps that make the biggest impact for employees. that create that happiness and that high performance, both. We don't have to pick. CEOs and executives and leaders don't have to pick between creating the happiness and having high performance. And when we slow down to help them see their purpose, to help with the belonging and the diversity and the inclusion and diversity, and the work-life balance, and then these next steps we'll talk about, when we slow down to take those steps, that's how we make the greatest impact in our teams. Because without it, employees are sort of floating around and they're disgruntled, they're that quiet quitting you're talking about, they're not, they're gossiping. I had a conversation recently with a team who they were spending a lot of time talking amongst each other. It's a small team of 9. You would think a small team of 9 would be really nimble, but some of the results were being held back because they were spending some time talking about the conflict with other people rather than addressing it head on. And so slowing down to have those courageous conversations, I call them courageous conversations, to create that framework, to take those steps, to essentially it's getting out of the weeds and setting the employees and the teams up for success.
Well, it's funny. I did a lot of technology companies, and all I can tell you is if I put 3 developers in a room, I can get 7 different opinions. It's and they can do anything. So let's talk a little bit. What are some of the ways leaders can effectively set expectations? What are some of the strategies that people can use?
That's a great question, David. So the strategies they can use to set expectations, again, this is a 5-minute practice, is to, when a new project comes on, is to set the expectation of the framework, right? When is it due? What resources they're going to need? What are the expectations? What does it look like for them to have success? How are they to interact with each other and their peers? We had talked earlier a little bit about values and having those established as a foundation. And we'll be talking about accountability later, but when it comes to setting expectations, some companies stop at just having this list of values. They put them on the wall and they think people are going to get that. But if you have a value of trust, and if you have 7 people on the team, you're going to have 7 different ideas of what trust means. So it's important to identify, what does it look like in action? What does trust specifically look like in action? Because if we're going to set expectations, not just for a project, but for performance, we want to have something to refer back to that tells us, oh, this is how you've been demonstrating trust. You have been meeting those expectations to create teamwork, to create collaboration, because teamwork isn't about the leadership creating. It's about everybody on that team pulling their own to collaborate with each other. It is not top down. David, you talk about a flat organization. Is this what you mean? That everybody's collaborating with each other. Everybody's holding each other positively accountable and working well together.
And it's exactly right. Some of these organizations went through, the single point of failure was the CEO, because the CEO felt that he or she had to make every decision, or that no decision could be made without their approval. That is a death sentence for companies. That is a surefire strategy to never grow, to be stuck in a quagmire. So along with that, people need to be held accountable. And a lot of the people think held accountable means do your job or you get fired. Well, there's a lot of depth and layers to this. And certainly no one wants to work in an environment where it's this or that. So can you talk, what is positive accountability and why is it important? And can you give us an example?
Yeah, so the person I was talking about earlier, when it comes to work-life balance and leaving that company after 8 years, her accountability was very negative. I mentioned earlier that she was afraid to speak up, because what was happening was when she was speaking up, there was a lot of criticism, there was a lot of blame, and a lot of fear instilled in her to be accountable for her goals. That is negative accountability. Positive accountability is when we have those values and those behaviors already established, and we can say, hey, is that living up to our value of trust? Is that meeting the deadline? And it's about questioning. It's about challenging each other. We have to have that baseline of trust to be able to do that. So I got distracted by the poll. Excuse me. Go ahead, David.
That's a great example. Now, employees need to grow. And one of the keys to that is skill building. So, especially to stay competitive. So can you talk a little bit about skill building and why and how that's important in being competitive?
It's really important. I talk about hard skills and soft skills. So the hard skills are the technical skills. And the skill building to remain competitive isn't just to hire for the skills that you want. And this might seem obvious, but it's to continue to give skill building learning opportunities. But it can't stop there. So when we have people, we also have a lot of the soft stuff. We have the pieces of skill building that many folks may not come in with or might need some help refining. And those are soft skills like communication, how to be organized, how to prioritize, how to collaborate, how to plan ahead, how to solve problems and adapt to change. Dave and I have talked a lot over the years about how hard it is to really change. And so giving employees an opportunity to have a coach or to have a workshop or to be mentored inside the company with helping them to those people skills is what I call them, because when we have people, we have people skills that we need to grow and develop.
Now, I know I'm not sure if we're set up technologically. I know you had a video with Jeff Klein about this. Are you able to share that video?
Yes, let me check in with Angel and see if she is ready for that. Looks like she is.
Go ahead.
So Jeff Klein is a CEO of an organization. We've done a lot of work with values, trust building, and I believe she'll be sharing that video here soon.
We reached out to Pathfinder. It was based out of a significant conflict between two of our team leaders, and so that was our initial goal. Was to figure out how to get them to work together, or help one of them understand why they didn't belong here at Members Development Company. And what's come out of our time with Pathfinder via our regular get-togethers as a team or our one-on-one is that the team has a base, it has a baseline to communicate. That we understand that there's a trust, that there's an accountability, that everyone is passionate, that we're focused on getting things to move forward for the sake of the organization, that there's not hidden agendas. By having those understandings amongst each other, you can sort of listen past the kinds of things that might normally impede a conversation where you might start to second guess somebody's motives. And so that common framework and that common ability to communicate has created a way for us to work better together and move more effectively, to be more productive than we were in the past.
Gosh, what a great summary in a way of what we had been talking about. That's really insightful by the CEO and how it's impacted his organization. So, Tammy, for those people on here and those people who see this webinar later, can you talk about what are some of the takeaways? What should people embrace in order to build a culture of design and enjoy some of the benefits of which you've been speaking?
So what that is to look at what the employees' lives are like outside of the organization, to keep that in mind, to keep in mind their well-being, which includes rest and opportunity for downtime. One of the takeaways that I hope you'll take away with today and implement immediately is some of all these steps, they don't take much time. And so to come out of the weeds and literally here's a strategy you can use. It's very practical. Schedule 5 minutes every day on your calendar. and reach out to one employee that day, acknowledge them for a contribution, let them know where they fit into the organization, or maybe even send an email to the entire organization that talks about where you're headed, what your purpose is, and how valuable the team is. That's valuable. It's also more valuable to share one-on-one or in a small group so people can hear face-to-face or eye-to-eye with you on Zoom. One of the takeaways too is that part of people performing well is that they have clarity of their expectations. They have clarity about where they fit into the organization, but they're also respected for who they are and their own interests and time. I charged a CEO once recently to make sure to evaluate are the right butts in the right seats of the organization, and ask your employees, your team, your executive team also, are they yearning to be expressing or to be giving their talents in ways that they're not giving them, because you're missing out on opportunities to be competitive, because the team that you have, switching them around a little bit or parts of their jobs might just make for more of a flat, responsive organization that can be built for speed. If you're really harnessing the individual strengths of those team members, I've run a lot of assessments with teams to identify what those strengths are. It can be very insightful for the team members and for the leadership. But take that time to do that. And it doesn't have to take a lot of time.
Well, would you like to summarize anything you like as you close this webinar for people?
I would, David, thank you. And then I'll invite you to share anything you want to wrap up as well. When we have one more video too with Tushar, who is a director of strategic operations, we can share that as well. But what I want to encourage you is this. I'm currently writing a book about doing what matters now. And the subtitle is to slow down to go faster in a 24/7 world. And recently at a training that I did with the team, we were talking about these things, the exact things we're talking about today, to slow down, to address the conflict and to be able to move on quickly, to slow down, to have these important conversations, to set the expectations, the strategies we've shared today, and how that actually speeds you up, because you could get 6 months down the road and the conflict that started 6 months ago is still impeding the results, because the employee, and I find this on executive teams too, we are still so consumed, so much of our mental energy and our productivity gets lower because we're consumed with the conflict we had 6 months ago. Can I trust this person? Is this person out to get me? And I literally facilitated a conversation where the trust got heated, or the conflict got really heated, and one person left the room. When they came back in, we facilitated that courageous conversation. And the result of that now is knowing that that person has their back, that they can see that they operate differently, that they communicate differently, that they can actually complement each other versus they were avoiding each other. They're members of an executive team reporting to the CEO, and the members on their respective teams, the executive teams, their teams were being divided because of this conflict that started 6 months ago with those executive team members.
People were taking sides.
Yes.
And that's the last thing you want. One of the things I found really interesting is people thought conflict resolution was, we're going to have some type of consensus, or we're all going to be in agreement. It's going to be unanimous. That's not possible. At one point or another, there's going to be fundamental disagreement, but we still have to move forward. So someone makes a decision, you move forward, and you're all on the same page at that point. You've had the discussion. You don't have full agreement. That's okay. What's not okay is you never move forward because you think you need to agree, and that's not possible in organizations. So sometimes you lose a battle to win the war. And if you're there trying to win every battle, you're going to lose the war. So that's one of the things that I found when I came into organizations, because we had to go fast. And paying attention to detail is really important because that's what comes back and bites you on the you know what. So, that's just sort of from my experience what I could share with the group. So I don't know if you want to show one more last video or sum it up.
This is a short last video. We'll share that, and then David, you can take us home.
Okay.
So go ahead, Angel Rose.
Receiving feedback, everyone has been definitely more open. We all are on the same page of what we want to do with the organization. We're all headed towards the same goal and same vision. How we approach one another and the tactics and the ideas that Tammy has presented has helped the conversation be more open and more fluid versus defensive or accusatory. The channel of communication, the trust between the team has definitely improved and has been a value add within the last 5 months, and definitely after that workshop for sure.
Great insight by that young man. And I think this is really key as companies move forward. I love when we come in, my team will do a assessment, and individuals say their strength is communication. But you know what the problem in the company is? A lack of communication. Well, if everybody's a great communicator, how is that possible? So being able to look in the mirror is really important, and I'm sure that is part of what you do for companies, is you hold up a mirror for these organizations. Is that correct?
It is. It is. It's holding up a mirror and challenging a new perspective in a new way, because we can't create something beyond what we already have if we're still doing it the same way. And speaking of that, David, let's share some results that have come in from these polling questions.
Sure.
Now, Angel Rose, we've got one, the first one that I can see here, that everybody answered yes, that they are creating cultures by design. And nobody answered no, that they're not. David, what would you say to that?
I would say that denial is prevalent amongst many people, not the people necessarily here. What is a culture by design? What is your plan? Is it in writing? Are the executable steps in writing? Are you spending time and energy and money towards that, which is a small investment? I mean, really small investment compared to the results that you get. So that's, and maybe the people here are all doing that, and that's why they're on this webinar, and I think that's great. But I cannot tell you the number of people. I mean, I'll go in and a CEO goes, I don't know what you can do differently. I've done everything I know. And my answer to him is, well, one of two things has to be true. One, you don't know everything, and there's some things that you're missing, which is usually the case. Or two, you have no place to go as an organization. You might as well close shop. In none of those experiences was it true that there was nothing to be done. There was a lot to be done. And, these companies that, grew. I had one go from 1.5 million to 5 million to 50 million in 2 years. Another go from 40 to 120 million in 2 years. It's doable. And that type of growth is doable when you have the right culture.
David, let me ask you, when companies aren't performing and you were brought in to help turn them around, where did addressing the culture rank in turning those companies around and creating the results you're talking about?
Oh, it was top of line. Because, and by the way, if people were not willing to accept change, then I found people to accept change. So I had one company, I had 40 people, we were 1.5 million. The next year we had 40 people, we were 5 million. But interesting enough, 30 of those 40 people were new to the organization because those people had been in the culture so long, they just could not facilitate change. You don't, and by the way, for the people on this call, you don't want that to be your company. right? You want to be able to take the core people that you have and get them working together to produce amazing results and feel part of that team. Everybody wants to know, hey, what's the score? How are we doing?
Yeah.
Nobody wants to play for a losing team.
So let's share some other results here. My leadership team knows how to build trust in the organization. 50% of the respondents said that 50 to 80%, yes, they agree that their team knows how to build trust in the organization. And 30 to 50% was the other choice that came in.
And that's great. You know, for those companies that are able to do that, that's fantastic. And for those companies that aren't, go get help. Because the fact that you can't doesn't mean that you have the skill sets and the experience to go make that change. And I've seen Tammy do this firsthand. So
Thank you, David. One more that came in here, or actually two more polling results. How do you define a culture of accountability in a positive way? And everybody said through holding each other accountable for long-term objectives, through support, teaching, leading, and problem solving. Now, my question is, so for the 100% that said that's how you do that, are you doing that? Are you instilling a culture of positive accountability? Or is there any kind of fear or criticism built into that? It's important to reflect on our words and how they're impacting the organization. And if you want to take it to the next level to really find out, ask somebody on your team. Ask somebody on your leadership team.
better yet, bring in someone who is a third party and people know that their confidentiality will be protected, and see what the answers to those questions are.
And the last one is, where do we need to slow down to get faster results tomorrow? It looks like assessing capacity before taking on new projects was what came in as the highest result there.
Okay.
So I want to invite people to put a question in the chat if you have any before we wrap up today. We've ended early for you, but you can put a question in the chat. And if you want to get a hold of me with a question after the webinar, I'll invite Angel Rose to put my contact information back up in the slide.
So it's on the bottom there, right? Phone number and your email.
Yes, you can call me. That is my mobile number. You can call me directly and ask a question. We can hop on a quick call and identify what in your organization you have the opportunity to slow down in that will make the fastest results. Because here, listen, folks, you don't start with all of these, right? You start with one that will make the greatest impact the fastest and build on that. That is creating a culture by design intentionally, to have that plan, to have it written down. But part of the steps is to write that down, but it's not to execute on all of it. It's to implement slowly to have those results stick.
That is so important for people to understand. As you know, one of my slogans is perfection is the enemy of progress. Don't wait until you have a perfect plan. Take steps. Can you be better next month than you were this month? Could you be better the month after than you were the preceding month? How do we do that? How do we get better every month? Because after 6 months, you're going to be way better. So.
All right, I don't see any questions in the chat. Thank you for joining us today. I look forward to speaking with you in the future and supporting you and answering any questions you have and creating a happy and high-performing team in your organization, one that is a culture that's built for speed, and you can move quickly to get the results that you want.
Well, thank you for your insights, Tammy. They were great.
You're welcome. Thank you for being here to facilitate the conversation, David. And thank you all for taking your time out of your day. I hope you can take what you've learned today back and implement one step and to impact change in your organization. All right, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon. Bye-bye.